Look, I didn't do anything wrong, just made a point he needed to hear. He'd been sulking for days, so I said the first thing that came to my mind, apologize or I'll go back to my ex. I thought he'd laugh it off like usual. Instead, he packed a bag, left the house, and 3 weeks later, I was served with legal papers carrying his name at the top. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. It started as a joke. At least, that's what I told myself. I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I just wanted to see him react for once. Ethan had been so distant lately. Always quiet, always too calm, like living beside a shadow instead of a husband. We argued that night about something small. The way most disasters begin. He forgot to pick up dry cleaning, or maybe it was about me being late again. I remember standing by the kitchen counter, arms crossed, saying he never apologized for anything. He said, "Because I'm not always wrong." And before I could stop myself, I laughed and said, "Then maybe I'll just go back to someone who used to say sorry." He asked, "Who?" And I said it, Caleb. The air changed. He didn't shout, didn't slam a door. He just stared at me, expressionless. I thought he'd roll his eyes, maybe argue. Instead, he said quietly, "Then maybe you should." And he walked out. At first, I thought it was funny. I texted Maya right after he left, telling her what happened. She sent a laughing emoji and said, "He'll cool off. He's too boring to actually leave." That made me laugh too. But as the hours passed and the house stayed silent, the joke started to feel heavier. His side of the bed was empty that night. When I called, he didn't answer. The next morning, Emma asked where Daddy was. I said he went to visit Grandma Clara. She accepted it easily. She was used to his business trips. I checked my phone again. No message, no missed call. I told myself it was fine, that men like him needed time to process emotions. At work, I tried to seem normal. Sienna, my coworker, noticed my smile looked forced. I told her Ethan and I had a small argument. She asked if everything was okay. I shrugged. "He's being dramatic. He'll come back when he's done sulking." She said, "You've been saying that a lot lately." I ignored her. That afternoon, I messaged Caleb for the first time in 2 years. I just wrote, "Guess who thought about you today?" He replied within minutes. "Still causing trouble, I see." It made me smile. It felt good to be the one chased again, even if it was just through text. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. Ethan had walked out, not me. By evening, my mother called. She said she'd heard from Clara that Ethan was staying with her for a few days. "What happened this time, Leora?" she asked. I said he'd overreacted to something small. "You can't keep pushing him like this," she said. "He's not the kind of man who argues. He's the kind who leaves." I rolled my eyes. "You always take his side." She sighed. "Maybe because he doesn't need to explain himself every time." I hung up before she could say more. That night, Maya came over with wine. "You really told him to apologize or you'd go back to Caleb?" she asked, half laughing, half scolding. "I was joking," I said. "He knows that." She raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure he knows?" I shrugged. "He'll get over it. He always does." She said softly, "What if he doesn't this time?" I told her to stop being dramatic. For 2 days, I heard nothing. Then I found out he'd taken some clothes and his laptop from the house. No note, no explanation, just absence. The silence started to feel like punishment. I told Emma again that Daddy was working. She said, "Then why do you look sad?" I smiled too quickly and said, "I'm not sad, sweetie, just tired." At the office, I caught myself checking my phone every few minutes. Even Sienna stopped teasing. "If you want him back, just call," she said. I told her I already did. She asked, "What did he say?" I said, "Nothing." That weekend, my parents invited me for dinner. I brought Emma. They tried to keep things normal, but I could feel their judgment hovering like smoke. My father finally asked, "Did you really mention your ex?" I said, "It wasn't serious." My mother said, "Words have a way of sounding serious when you repeat them." After dinner, I took Emma home, put her to bed, and opened my messages again. Nothing from Ethan, but there was one from Caleb. "Still thinking about me." I typed back, "Maybe I should have never left you." I hesitated before hitting send. Then I did it anyway. The next morning, Ethan's mother called. Her tone was polite, controlled. "Ethan is safe," she said. "He just needs time." I asked if he was angry. She said, "He's not angry, Leora. He's disappointed." That word cut deeper than I expected. "Tell him to come home," I said. She replied, "You're the one who told him to go." That night, I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through old photos on my phone. Ethan smiling, Emma on his shoulders, our vacations. I told myself I was right, that he'd made me feel invisible long before I said what I said. But I couldn't ignore the tightness in my chest every time I imagined him not coming back. Then, out of nowhere, Caleb called. His voice was the same, warm, easy, dangerous. "I heard you're single again," he said. I laughed. "I'm not single. We're just taking a break." He said, "That's what they all say before they realize they're better off." When I hung up, I noticed something strange. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was judgmental. I checked my phone one last time before bed. No message from Ethan, just one new text from an unknown number. "Please direct any future communication through email." At first, I didn't understand. Then I saw the signature, E. Dane. He wasn't sulking, he was starting something. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or panic. For the first time since the joke, it didn't feel like a game anymore. It felt like the beginning of something I couldn't control. The following week felt like living underwater, everything muffled, slow, detached. Ethan hadn't come home, and his message about using email lingered in my mind like an echo I didn't understand. I told myself he was bluffing, trying to sound important. Men always used big words when they didn't know how to handle emotions. At work, I pretended nothing was wrong. When Sienna asked if he was back yet, I said he was just clearing his head. She nodded politely but didn't believe me. By lunchtime, I saw her whispering to another colleague. I heard fragments: fight, left, someone else. Gossip traveled fast in open offices. That night, I came home to a half-empty closet. A few of Ethan's suits were gone, his watch box missing. I texted him again. "Are you planning to come back or not?" He replied 2 hours later with one line. "Not right now. No apology, no explanation, just detachment." I called Maya, half crying, half angry. "He's treating me like a stranger," I said. She asked what I expected. "You told him you'd go back to your ex." I said, "It was a joke." She sighed. "He's not the joking type, Leora. You knew that." I said, "Then he shouldn't have married me if he can't handle my personality." She didn't argue, which somehow felt worse. 2 days later, my debit card declined at the grocery store. I thought it was an error, but when I checked the account, it said, "Access restricted." I called the bank, and they told me the joint account had been converted to single access under his name. I laughed bitterly. "He can't do that," I said. The woman on the phone replied, "If both parties agreed in writing, he can." I hung up shaking. That evening, I called my mother. "He's trying to control me with money now," I said. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Or maybe he's protecting himself." I snapped, "From what? His own wife?" She said softly, "From what you might do next." I didn't like that answer. Later that night, I poured wine and scrolled through old messages with Caleb. He'd been sending photos of his new apartment, his new car, his new everything. I told him I missed how easy things used to be. He replied, "Maybe you still want what's easy." I said, "What I want is to be seen." When I woke up the next morning, there was an email from Ethan's lawyer. I opened it, expecting something about the account. Instead, It read, "This correspondence serves as notice of temporary separation. Mr. Dane requests no direct personal contact for the time being." My throat went dry. Attached were PDF files, terms, draft agreements, dates. It felt official, real. I forwarded it to Maya, demanding she read it. She called within minutes. "He's filing for legal separation," she said. "This isn't a threat, Leora. This is paperwork." I said, "He's bluffing. He'll calm down." She said, "He's not angry enough to be bluffing. He's done." At work, I kept refreshing my inbox, waiting for another message from him, some clarification that this wasn't final. Nothing came. Sienna asked if I wanted to grab lunch. I said I had too much to do. She hesitated before saying, "He's serious, isn't he?" I glared. "You don't know him?" She said quietly, "I think maybe you didn't either." That evening, Clara called. Ethan's mother always sounded like a school principal, soft-spoken but impossible to ignore. "You've made things very difficult for him," she said. "He's trying to keep this civil." I said, "By cutting me off financially." She said, "By keeping things peaceful. He doesn't want to fight, Leora. He wants distance." I told her to stop acting like I was the villain. She said, "You're not a villain. You're just not his partner anymore." After that call, I sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I had Caleb. But when I texted him, he didn't reply. I sent another, "Can I come over tonight?" Hours passed. Nothing. When he finally responded, it said, "Busy. Maybe later this week." It stung more than I wanted to admit. The next morning, Emma asked if Daddy was coming home soon. I said, "He's working through some things." She looked confused. "Did he do something bad?" she asked. I said, "No, sweetie. He's just being stubborn." She thought about that and said, "He said you were the one being mean." My heart stopped. "When did he say that?" I asked. She shrugged. "On the phone with Grandma." That evening, I drove to Clara's house. I didn't plan to go in, just to see if he was really there. The lights were on. His car was in the driveway. I almost rang the bell, but then I saw him through the window sitting at the table with Clara and Emma, helping with her homework. He looked peaceful, steady. I turned off the engine and just sat there, watching through the glass like an outsider. When I finally drove home, I called Maya again. "He's acting like I don't exist," I said. She said, "Maybe that's the point." I asked, "Do you think he'll forgive me?" She said, "I don't think he's angry enough to forgive. I think he's moved on to protecting himself." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house made me jump. I opened my laptop and started writing him an email, long and messy, explaining that I didn't mean what I said, that I was just frustrated. I read it twice, deleted half, rewrote it softer. I never sent it. The next morning, I got another email from his lawyer. Notification of mediation scheduling, property, custody, and financial terms to be discussed. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold. This wasn't silence anymore. It was structure. He wasn't waiting to come home. He was building a life that no longer included me. The week after that email, I stopped pretending everything was normal. People could tell. My hair was unwashed, my clothes mismatched, my eyes always on my phone. At work, I caught 2 colleagues whispering when I walked by. I heard one say, "She's the one whose husband left, right?" I wanted to snap at them, to defend myself, but I didn't have the energy. That Friday, I went out with Maya. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. We sat at a small restaurant downtown. She asked if I'd heard from Ethan. I said no, but I'd seen him tagged in a photo, him, Emma, and Clara at a park. He looked happy. I said, "Can you believe he's pretending like I died?" Maya said, "He's pretending like he's healing." I rolled my eyes. "Healing from what?" I made a joke. She said quietly, "You made a threat." I changed the subject and told her I'd met Caleb again for coffee. She frowned. You really think that helps? I said, he gets me. He always did. She said, he also left you the first time. I laughed it off, saying, at least he talks to me. But inside, it didn't sound as convincing. When I got home, I checked my messages. Caleb had texted, had fun today. Let's keep it simple. That line bothered me. Simple. I told myself it just meant easy, casual, but deep down, I knew it meant temporary. 2 days later, my mother came over. She had that careful tone parents use before scolding you. I heard from Clara, she said. She says Ethan's been calm about all this. I said, calm? He's destroying me. She asked, has he said anything bad about you? I hesitated. No, but he's cutting me off, talking through lawyers like I'm some stranger. She sighed. Maybe that's because you told him to go back to another man. I slammed my glass down. It wasn't serious. She said, maybe it was to him. That night, I opened a bottle of wine and went online. I posted a long, vague message. Funny how some people pretend to be victims after making others miserable for years. I added a sad emoji, knowing exactly how it would look. Within minutes, friends commented with sympathy. Stay strong, one wrote. Men always run when they can't handle real women, said another. It felt good, for a moment. I screenshotted the support and sent it to Maya. She didn't reply. The next morning, Sienna pulled me aside at work. You should probably take that post down, she said quietly. It's going around. I asked what she meant. She said, people saw Ethan's name tagged in one of the comments. His friends are sharing it. My stomach dropped. I checked my phone. My post had over 100 reactions and several comments I didn't recognize. Some defended me, some mocked me. I deleted it, but it was too late. That evening, I got a call from Clara. Her tone was calm, but icy. Leora, she said, you've made this public. Ethan doesn't want to respond, but I think you should stop before you embarrass yourself further. I snapped, embarrass myself? He left me. She said, he left quietly. You're the one shouting. I hung up and cried for the first time since he walked out. I didn't even know what I was crying for. Him, my pride, or the fact that he wasn't fighting back. The next day, Caleb called. You've got everyone talking, he said, laughing. You always loved the spotlight. I told him I wasn't enjoying it. He said, then stop feeding it. I said, you don't understand. He said, I understand perfectly. You want control, and he took it away. The truth in that made me hang up. The following morning, I received a formal envelope at work. Inside was a notice of pending mediation and evidence disclosure. My heart raced as I read the line that said, Mr. Dane will provide documentation of communications relevant to the dissolution of marriage. I didn't know what that meant until I reached the attachment list, emails, messages, call logs, even screenshots of my social media posts. I stormed into my boss's office, babbling about personal matters. He listened politely, then said, You should take time off. People are uncomfortable with how public this has become. That word, uncomfortable, made me want to scream. That night I called Ethan. For the first time in weeks, he picked up. His voice was calm, measured. This line isn't appropriate anymore, Leora, he said. I begged him to stop the legal nonsense. We can fix this, I said. You're overreacting. He said, You said you'd go back to someone else if I didn't apologize. You made your terms clear. I said, It was a joke. He paused. It was the truth underneath a joke. Then the line went silent. The next day, Maya came over. She looked exhausted. I talked to Mom, she said. She said Ethan's already hired someone good. He's not dragging this out. He's finalizing. I said, he wouldn't do that to Emma. She looked at me sadly. He's doing it for Emma. I didn't know what that meant until she handed me a folder. Clara sent this to Mom, she said. Inside were printouts, my texts with Caleb, screenshots of my post, copies of messages I thought I'd deleted. Everyone labeled, dated. He had this the whole time, I whispered. Maya said, he's been preparing quietly while you were shouting. I stared at the papers, the proof of everything I'd laughed off, and realized something sickening. Ethan's silence hadn't been weakness. It had been strategy. That night I lay in bed, phone in hand, scrolling through our old photos, trying to find the moment where he'd stopped loving me. But all I saw were small smiles that had probably been holding back disappointment for years. When I woke up the next morning, another envelope was waiting at my door. This one thicker, stamped Dane and Associates, Family Law Division. For a long time, I just stood there staring at it, not ready to open it, but knowing I already knew what was inside. The envelope sat on the counter all morning before I finally opened it. Inside were more documents, mediation dates, lists of assets, and one page labeled Evidence Summary. My hands trembled as I read. There it was. Every message to Caleb, every joke I'd made about Ethan, even my post from last week with the timestamp. It wasn't just screenshots. It was printed and signed by his lawyer. I felt sick. I called Maya immediately. He's digging through my life, I said. He's turning everything into proof. She asked what the papers said. I read parts out loud, my voice shaking. She was quiet for a long moment before saying, "You gave him the proof yourself." I snapped, "You're supposed to be on my side." She sighed. "Maybe it's time you stop looking for sides." Later that afternoon, I drove to my parents' house. My mother was in the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked at me the way people look at someone they can't quite forgive but still love. "He's not trying to ruin you," she said after I told her everything. "He's protecting himself." I said, "He's humiliating me." She said softly, "You humiliated him first." Her words made my stomach twist. I left before dinner, ignoring my father's attempt to speak to me at the door. When I got home, I poured a drink and opened my laptop. Caleb was online. I messaged him, "You won't believe what Ethan's doing." He replied, "You told me he'd always forgive you." I said, "He's weaponizing my words." Caleb responded, "You gave him the ammunition." That made me furious. "Don't take his side," I typed. He didn't answer. The next day was the mediation. I wore my best suit and practiced a calm expression in the mirror. I kept telling myself Ethan would see reason once we were in the same room. When I arrived, he was already seated beside his lawyer, looking collected, almost peaceful. He stood when I entered and nodded, polite, distant. I hated that composure. It made me look unhinged before I even spoke. The meeting began with the mediator outlining the process. Then Ethan's lawyer started talking about finances, property, and emotional stability for the child. Every word was measured, cold. I interrupted, saying he was exaggerating everything. "He's trying to make me look unstable," I said. The lawyer just handed me another folder. Inside were transcripts of my social media posts and photos of me with Caleb at that cafe. "This is harassment," I said, my voice shaking. Ethan finally looked up. "It's documentation," he said quietly. I turned to the mediator. "He's manipulating this entire situation." Ethan didn't even react. "You told me to go back to your ex," he said simply. "I just listened." Everyone in the room froze. I could feel my face burning. "It was sarcasm," I said. "A joke." He looked at me calmly. "Then why did you message him the next day?" I couldn't speak. My lawyer placed a hand on my arm, whispering for me to breathe. The mediator asked for a break, and I rushed out of the room, nearly tripping over my bag. In the hallway, I tried calling Maya again. She didn't answer. I stood by the window, staring at the parking lot below, and realized that Ethan wasn't trying to fight me. He was dismantling me quietly, legally, piece by piece. When the meeting resumed, they moved on to custody. "For now," his lawyer said, "Mr. Dane requests primary custody to maintain consistency for the child." I slammed my hand on the table. "You're not taking my daughter from me." Ethan didn't flinch. "I'm not taking her," he said. "I'm keeping her safe." That broke me. I felt tears rising, but I refused to let them fall in front of him. I said he was cruel, that he wanted to punish me. The mediator's voice cut through softly. "This is not about punishment. It's about protection." When it was over, I could barely stand. Ethan gathered his papers neatly, thanked the mediator, and left the room without a word to me. I followed him outside, calling his name. He turned, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. "You're really doing this?" I asked. He said, "You asked for it." I said, "You know I didn't mean it." He replied, "You meant enough of it for me to believe you." Then he walked to his car and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot with tears I couldn't swallow anymore. That evening, I went to Caleb's apartment. I needed comfort, validation, anything. When he opened the door, he looked surprised. "Leora, it's late," he said. I told him I didn't care, that I just needed someone to talk to. He hesitated before letting me in. "I don't think this is a good idea," he said. "You've got enough going on." I said, "You started this. You made me remember what I was missing." He shook his head. "I didn't make you forget who you were." I stood there, humiliated again, and walked out before he could say more. When I got home, the house felt smaller than ever. My phone buzzed. A message from Ethan's lawyer. "Property access will be limited after the 15th. Please arrange collection of belongings." I dropped the phone onto the couch and sat in silence, realizing there was nothing left to argue. For years, I'd called him passive, too quiet, too gentle to stand up for himself. But now his silence had shape and force. It was strategy, structure, finality. As I poured another drink, I thought about the look on his face in that meeting, steady, unshaken. It wasn't revenge I saw there. It was resolve, and that terrified me more than anything. The next few days blurred together, each one a little quieter, a little smaller. I stopped going to the office after my manager pulled me aside and said maybe I should take an indefinite leave. It wasn't even phrased as a question. The sympathy in his voice felt like pity. At home, unopened envelopes piled on the table. More letters from lawyers, from the bank, from things Ethan had already changed. I tried to call him again, just once. The number went straight to voicemail. I didn't even know what I would have said if he'd answered. "Let's talk." I didn't mean it. It all sounded too weak now. One evening, Maya came by unannounced. She looked exhausted, holding a grocery bag like she'd expected to find me collapsed somewhere. "You're losing everything," she said softly. I told her she was being dramatic. She said, "You don't even have access to your accounts, Leora. He's 2 steps ahead of you in every way." I laughed bitterly. "So what? You're proud of him now." She said, "I'm not proud. I'm just done pretending he's the problem." We sat at the kitchen table in silence until she finally asked, "What are you really afraid of?" I wanted to say losing him, but what came out was that everyone will think he's right. She looked at me for a long time. Maybe he is. Then she left, taking the groceries with her. That night, I poured another drink and checked my phone. Caleb hadn't texted in over a week. I sent him one last message. I could really use someone to talk to. An hour later, he replied, "I think you should focus on your family, Leora." My chest tightened. "You are my family," I typed, then deleted it before hitting send. The next morning, I went to pick up Emma from my parents. My mother met me at the door, arms crossed. "She's with Ethan today," she said. I frowned. "It's my weekend." She handed me a printed schedule from his lawyer. Not anymore. He got temporary custody until the final decision. I felt dizzy. "You knew?" I asked. She said, "He told us yesterday. He wanted to make sure we didn't get caught in the middle." I laughed, half in disbelief. "So now you're all on his side?" She didn't answer. She just said, "He's being careful. You should start being careful too." I left before I said something I couldn't take back. At home, the silence felt heavier than ever. I opened the box of old photos again, flipping through years of smiles that now look staged. I found one picture of Ethan holding Emma at the beach. He was squinting against the sun, hair windblown, pure joy on his face. I hadn't noticed how many photos I'd taken where I wasn't in the frame. It hit me then how much he'd been the one holding everything together while I'd been too busy looking for proof that he didn't love me enough. That afternoon, a courier came to the door with another envelope. I signed for it automatically, already numb to the process. Inside was a court notice. Final custody and property hearing, scheduled for next week. I sat on the floor, reading it over and over. The words didn't sting anymore. They just felt final. I tried to reach out to Sienna, but she didn't pick up. Later, I saw she'd unfollowed me on social media. My posts were gone too. I'd deleted them weeks ago, but apparently, screenshots lived forever. By the next day, I couldn't stand being alone, so I drove to Ethan's old office building, thinking maybe seeing his car would make him feel real again. But his space in the lot was empty. A receptionist told me politely he'd taken a remote position. She didn't say where. I sat in my car for a long time afterward, staring at my reflection in the window. My own face looked unfamiliar. Tired, older, smaller. I whispered, "You wanted freedom. You got it." The words didn't sound triumphant. They sounded like a sentence. That night, I dreamed about the kitchen argument again. Only this time, in the dream, he didn't leave. He just stood there, quiet, watching me as I laughed and said those awful words. When I woke up, my throat hurt from clenching. Later that morning, I went to the house. It wasn't mine anymore, not technically, but I still had the key. The rooms were half empty. The walls smelled like new paint. My paintings, the ones he'd framed for me, were stacked in the corner. On the kitchen counter sat a small box labeled personal items. Inside was my wedding ring, my watch, a photo of Emma and me, and a note in his handwriting. For when you're ready to remember who you were before the noise. I sank to the floor, clutching the note, realizing that every quiet gesture he made wasn't about punishing me. It was about closure. He'd already accepted the ending while I was still trying to rewrite the story. That evening, I called Maya again, voice shaking. "He's not angry," I said. "He's just gone." She was silent for a moment before replying, "That's worse, isn't it?" I said, "He's erasing me." She said, "No, Leora, he's freeing himself." When I hung up, I finally opened my laptop to look at the court documents again. It was all there. Terms, schedules, property transfers. Everything in order, signed, efficient. He'd even arranged for me to keep some savings so I wouldn't struggle. The kindness of it broke me in a way cruelty never could. By nightfall, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt hollow, like a shell of something that had already moved on. And just before I went to bed, my phone buzzed. A new message from his lawyer. Reminder, final hearing tomorrow, 9 a.m. I stared at it for a long time, the words sharp and clean. Tomorrow. The day it would all stop belonging to me. The courthouse was smaller than I imagined. Just beige walls, tired lights, and that faint smell of paper and cold coffee. I sat on one side of the room, clutching a folder I didn't even need. My lawyer whispered things about fair terms and mutual benefit, but the words didn't stick. All I could see was Ethan, across the table, calm as a photograph. He wore a dark suit, nothing flashy, just clean and simple. He didn't look at me. I'd spent days imagining what he might say, some acknowledgement, a sigh, maybe even a moment of hesitation. But when he finally did speak, it was only to confirm his name, his address, his agreement to the terms. His voice didn't shake. Mine did. The judge asked if we both understood the settlement. I nodded before my lawyer even finished explaining. Custody to Ethan, limited visitation for me, property transferred in full. Joint assets divided by record. The legal phrasing was so tidy it made the whole thing feel clinical, like erasing a file instead of a life. I tried to catch his eye once, but he didn't lift his gaze. When the judge said, "Case finalized," Ethan simply thanked her and signed. Then he turned to his lawyer, shook his hand, and walked out. Just like that. No scene, no anger, no last words. I sat there frozen while everyone else left the room. My lawyer said something about mailing copies. I just nodded, unable to move. The sound of the door closing behind him felt louder than the judge's gavel. Outside, the sun was too bright. I stood on the steps staring at the papers in my hands, wondering how it had all happened so quietly. People passed by without looking at me, like I was invisible. For the first time, I realized that I actually was. When I finally got home to my apartment, the space looked smaller. There were still boxes I hadn't unpacked. The air smelled like dust and leftover wine. I put the papers on the table and stared at the last page, the signatures side by side, perfectly aligned. No smudges, no hesitation. His handwriting was steady. Mine was rushed, uneven. I don't know how long I sat there before I noticed the envelope taped to my door. There was no return address, just my name in his handwriting. I tore it open and found a single sheet of paper inside. "Please don't contact me outside of scheduled visitation. For Emma's sake, I hope you find peace." I read it over and over until the words blurred. It wasn't cruel. It was just done. He didn't even hate me anymore. That was the part that hurt most. Hate still connects two people. This was silence. I thought about calling him anyway, just to hear his voice one last time. But what would I have said? I didn't mean it. I was lonely. "I thought you'd chase me." None of it sounded right. None of it mattered anymore. Later, my mother called. She didn't ask about the case. She already knew. "I hope you'll rest now," she said softly. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. "You always say that when you've lost something you can't admit you wanted." I didn't respond. That night, I sat by the window with the lights off, watching the street below. Across the road, a man was helping his daughter out of a car, small backpack, pink shoes. For a moment, I thought it was Ethan and Emma, but when I looked closer, it wasn't. Still, my heart raced like it was. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. On the counter sat my phone, silent. No new messages. I opened our old chat anyway, scrolling through months of texts, the little reminders, grocery lists, weekend plans. Then I reached the top, the first message he'd ever sent me years ago. "You seem impossible to forget." I closed the phone. Around midnight, I packed the folder and the court documents into a drawer. Then I took off my wedding ring, the one I hadn't been able to throw away. I placed it on top of the papers and stared at it until my eyes blurred. I whispered, "I didn't mean to lose you," but it sounded childish, even to me. For a long time, I sat in the dark, waiting for some kind of regret to turn into clarity. It didn't. It just sat there beside me, quiet and cold. In the morning, I opened my email out of habit. At the top was a message from his lawyer, confirming that all matters were concluded. The last line read, "No further correspondence required." I stared at it until my vision went hazy, until those 6 words stopped being legal language and started sounding like something else entirely, like a verdict. No further correspondence required. That was all I'd ever been waiting for. A response. And now, even that was gone. I closed the laptop, sat on the edge of the bed, and realized that silence wasn't something he'd given me to punish me. It was what he'd claimed for himself. Peace I'd mocked him for needing. Peace he'd finally taken without asking. And somewhere deep down, I knew he was right to. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.